Welcome back to Understanding the World. I'm Rabbi David Kaufman. I'm joined in the studio by Mark Finkelstein of the Jewish Federation of Greater Des Moines, our JCRC director, and we will be joined in a moment by Rachel Lazar and Barbara Weinstein of the Religious Action Center of Reform Judaism. Before we welcome them, I'd like to thank Dr. Ronald Bergman and Bergman Folkers Cosmetic Surgery and Spa for his wonderful support of our show, enabling us to do the work that we do and to bring wonderful guests on our show to share their understanding of the world with you. And with that, I'd like to welcome Rachel and Barbara to the show.
Very happy to be here. Hello.
Tell us a little bit about what you do at the Religious Action Center and what the Religious Action Center does. How's that for a start?
Sure, absolutely. Well, first of all, thank you very much for having us both on. We're really excited about this. The RAC is the Washington office of the Reformed Jewish Movement, which is the largest of the kind of four main denominations of North American Jewry. And we've just celebrated our 50th anniversary about 2 years ago. And the RAC was really created at the height of the civil rights movement to focus on issues of civil rights that were so core to so much of the American Jewish community during the 1960s. And since then, our mandate has really expanded. We work on about 60 different issues of social justice, mostly domestic, but international as well. Everything from the separation of church and state to LGBT equality to international religious freedom. And our job is really to bring the reform movement to Washington and to bring Washington to the reform movement.
And what do each of you do at the Religious Action Center?
So I'm the associate director. I kind of broadly oversee our legislative work. And I also run our legislative assistant fellowship, which is really one of our flagship programs. It's a one-year post-college fellowship in Jewish values and social justice. And we get an extraordinary pool of applicants, new college graduates who join us, about 5 or 6 of them join us at the end of August each year and spend a year learning about the public policy issues that are important to the Reformed Jewish movement and how to be advocates for social justice on those issues.
And I'm Rachel Lazar, and I'm the deputy director, so I'm David's deputy, and that means I do a little bit of everything, from running our senior staff retreats to running our issue campaigns, which is something that we've been focusing on over here, which is how do we deepen our voice, in an institution that exists to bring the Jewish voice to so many different issues in Washington. How do we focus and have more impact still on a few issues at a time? And I've been spending a lot of time with our staff here, but also with our rabbis and congregants across the country, deepening that work and that voice in Washington on a few issues.
Hi, this is Mark in Des Moines. How are you guys doing?
Hi, Bo.
Good. I have a question about church-state relations. It's very important to the Jewish community that there be a division between church and state, and we look very carefully about the interpenetration of both. What is the current thinking about whether church-state is an absolute separation, or is it more like a Swiss cheese in your estimation?
Can take this one. I think church-state separation is absolutely sort of separated in the minds of the reform movement. There's church and state, and the two shouldn't sort of cross. But the First Amendment also has room for freedom of religion, right? That's the other side of church-state that is one of our core American principles and also a core principle of the reform movement. And so we spend time here ensuring that there isn't creep of church into the state, but also ensuring that there is religious freedom and exemptions for people of faith throughout our laws to make sure that religious freedom isn't interfered with.
We have the question, though, for instance, of tax exemption of houses of worship. Wouldn't that be inclusion of church and state to some degree?
Interesting question.
That is. I mean, I think that, when it comes to sort of direct funding types of issues, that's where our movement is most sensitive about the separation of church and state, and so, having a tax exempt status is in a sense, I think sort of leaning into, that separation and saying, that it's very important to sort of honor, foundational principles like the importance of our religious freedom, actually. So I think that's actually the foundational principle behind tax exemption, that it enables sort of us to exist sort of apart from attachment to the government.
It really also speaks to the unique role that houses of worship has played in this country really since the very beginning, even before the United States existed as a country, right? We were founded by those seeking religious freedom, the ability to exercise the tenets of their faith. And that's a tradition that has continued right up until this day, that the role that houses of worship play is really about speaking truth to power. And if you think of some of the greatest social justice leaders of our time, people that we here at the RAC look to for inspiration, like Dr. Martin Luther King and Abraham Joshua Heschel, they were themselves religious leaders.
Now, we have all kinds of interaction going on right now over the healthcare program of the Affordable Care Act. And I know that President Obama spoke recently at Temple Emmanuel in Dallas, where people in the congregation are helping to spread information about how to sign up for health care. Can you talk a little bit about the role of religious organizations in dealing with the Affordable Care Act specifically, but also more broadly in programs of social justice that are federal programs or state programs?
Well, first of all, we have a role to play for the Union for Reform Judaism in advising our own congregations about what their obligations are under the Affordable Care Act, notice obligations and things like that to their own staff. So that's sort of one layer of the puzzle. But in terms of outreach and living up to our values of everybody being entitled to have healthcare coverage and ensuring that as many of the 40 million as possible are now going to be covered under the Affordable Care Act, many of our synagogues are engaging with coalitions within their states who are seeking to spread the word about the Affordable Care Act in responsible legal ways, making our facilities available where it's appropriate for outreach meetings and the like. And so we're the whole thing is still sort of in a preliminary phase since enrollment was so recent, but we're in this preliminary phase in conversations with partners, labor unions, African-American coalitions, Latino coalitions, and others to ensure that our synagogues are at the table working to create structures that will be effective in increasing enrollment and therefore coverage.
And I think the Affordable Care Act is really a great example of how the RAC goes about the work that it does. We look at the public policy issues before us as a Reform Jewish movement and say, what are the Jewish values, the Jewish texts, the Jewish traditions that can help guide and shape our thinking on these issues? Now, obviously, if you look in the 5 books of Moses in the Torah, you're probably not going to see a direct reference to the Affordable Care Act. But we can look to text as a guide for how we should view public policy initiatives like that which seeks to ensure that all Americans have access not just to emergency care, but to preventative care as well. And we know that, for example, Maimonides, one of the greatest Jewish scholars of all time, but lived in the medieval period, was not just a philosopher, but a physician as well. And he spoke about healthcare being the most important service that a community can offer to its members. And so we look at that and say, okay, here we are in our modern 2013 community, or 2010 when the law was passed, and we see that there is an injustice that 49 million Americans go without health care at some point each year. And that is not reflective of the values that we think our society should embody. And so that really informed the advocacy work that we did to get the law passed, and that we continue to do to help make sure that as many people are able to participate in it as possible.
And I'll just add, because before I came to the RAC, I worked more in the secular progressive community. And one of the amazing things about being at the RAC for me is that we can start by advocating for an issue and using sort of our grass tops, clergy across the country, our grassroots, very connected, passionate congregants across the country. But once that phase of advocacy is over, we also bring an infrastructure where we have, sort of offices all across the country that are able to affect change and actually live the change that the law was intending to bring. And so that's a really wonderful aspect of being part of the RAC and part of this movement.
And one of the things that I teach, when I teach about healthcare to our confirmation students, the single most important Jewish text to me is that when you save one life, you save the whole world, because that puts saving a life above everything else, and that, I think, puts the importance of not only getting healthcare access for everybody, but making sure that it actually works. So that's the text that I normally teach. I don't know if the Religious Action Center uses that text for that purpose, but that's the one that I use for that purpose.
It's a good kind of all-purpose. One of our favorites is tzedek, tzedek tirdof.
Yeah.
Justice shall you pursue. It's a good catch-all. We use it all the time.
So one of the things I think people need to know about the Religious Action Center, one, it's directed by Rabbi David Saperstein, and one of my classmates, Rabbi Michael Namath, is there also. It's an organization that has rabbis and lawyers, legal professionals, legislative professionals, and political scientists who understand how the political system works, and it brings everybody together. And it does so in a very effective way. I've noticed, a lot of organizations tend to be one track and not the others. And the Religious Action Center, I think, is one of the unique organizations that has the ability to bring all these things together and speak to various audiences in an effective way about not only what the issues are on a religious level and on a practical level, but to really give people the means to make a change. Is that something that you see and you promote about the RAC?
Yeah, absolutely. We take very seriously the mandate of both inspiring and training the next generation of social justice activists. So we're not only a staff here that goes out and does the advocacy on Capitol Hill or with the administration, but we also go to our congregations and invite them here to Washington so that they can learn skills to be advocates as well. One of our flagship programs that I know you've been on several times, Rabbi Kaufman, is the Litaken Teen Social Justice Seminars. And we run about 6 of them each year. It's a weekend-long program where we bring about 300 or 400 high school students, 15, 16-year-olds, to Washington from Friday evening to Monday afternoon. And we spend the weekend teaching them about a range of different issues of Jewish social justice. And then we take them on Monday to Capitol Hill, where they meet with their senators and representatives and their staffs and get to talk to them about issues that they've been touched by and inspired by over the course of the weekend. And it shows them both the link between their Jewish values and their responsibility to care for their communities and their country and the world around them, and the fact that they have a voice in this process, that this isn't something just for adults, that this is something that each individual has an ability and a responsibility to participate in. And that goes the same for other programs that we run for college students who can join us for a summer-long internship program and the year-long legislative assistant program that I mentioned before as well, in addition to rabbinic training programs that help rabbis infuse their rabbinate with deep social justice values.
You gotta be quiet about the Litaken program, because I really want to bring my kids back on the Litaken program, and every time I look at the schedule, it's full. So we need more of them or fewer people coming, one or the other, so that I can have a chance to bring the kids on a weekend that they want to go. Because the kids who've gone on the Litaken program from my congregation still talk about it years later as being one of the best experiences they ever had. It's really a fantastic program. Mark's got a question.
Yeah, Rachel, you were apparently working with a group called Third Way. Can you tell us something about that, please?
Yeah, sure. Third Way leads the moderate wing of the progressive movement. So some way that people put it is they're a left-leaning think tank that specializes in reaching moderates. And when you're at Third Way, some people who are there characterize it as wanting to bring moderates into the progressive fold. And other people who share the same office say they want to actually bring progressives a little bit closer to moderates. But in any case, the think tank sort of exists in this very important space where we know as progressives that in order to win on any issue, we need moderates to come along with us. And so it's not necessarily always sort of where progressives' heads are to think about what do we need to do to stay true to our principles, 100% true to them, but also be able to speak most effectively to moderates such that they'll come along with us. And that was the space that I lived in there. I ran the culture program, which actually attempted to eke out shared values and work in that space on the most divisive social issues of our time, like abortion and gay rights. And so that's a lot of the work that I did there. And I actually built a coalition with centrist evangelical Christians and progressives who came together on gay rights and abortion in certain ways that I'd be happy to elaborate on now or some other time.
Yeah, I do a lot of that. In fact, I say, I don't preach to the choir. I preach to the people who don't agree with me. Primarily, and I speak to the progressive left about what the right wing feels to try to talk about the center and get things done, and I do the same thing when I speak to the right wing. Talk to the right wing about same-sex marriage or other progressive issues, and to try to get things done. I mean, that's really how you bridge gaps and get work done, because there's too much partisanship, at least in my perspective. One of the things we're seeing, and I know Mark would agree with me on this, is in interfaith relations, the issue of same-sex marriage has really made it very difficult for a lot of interfaith groups to work. And a lot of clergy coalitions have collapsed over the issue of same-sex marriage. And we're actively trying to rebuild a lot of those. But I don't know if you're seeing that nationally. The other thing that's happening on the same issue is relations between the progressive community and the African American community because of same-sex marriage, and it particularly involves Catholics on Catholic progressive relations and African American progressive relations. So, do you see that nationally, and what kind of things do you do when you see that to work to overcome it?
So, good question. I think on the national front that we've been very aware of the progress, even on the question of marriage equality within the faith community. So I think when our president came out in favor of marriage equality, we all here in Washington were very acutely aware of how he was bringing even Black pastors and some others in the faith community along with him. That said, I do still believe that the question of marriage in the realm of gay equality continues to by far be the most divisive place. And we've seen that in particular because we have been working hard at the RAC and in Washington, as everybody knows, on the Employment Non-Discrimination Act, which just passed last week, 64 to 32, I think it was. And in that instance, it was essential to be able to tell our interfaith partners that to actually explicitly acknowledge, even in the letters that we were sending on behalf of the faith community, and we actually coordinated one from the RAC where we had over 60 religious organizations who joined us, but we had to say explicitly in the letter that we acknowledged that some of us are in different places on the question of marriage. But that doesn't mean that when it comes to the issue of worker justice, you know, Isaiah in the Bible spoke to certain people, and to other Americans, they relate to the American value of meritocracy and just workplace fairness. But that we could all come together much more on employment non-discrimination. Still, though, and I just want to acknowledge this, that as compared to some of the other divisive issues that we've worked on from the RAC this year and some of these campaigns that I was talking about earlier, so even gun violence prevention and certainly immigration reform in particular, we have still experienced more resistance from certain parts of the interfaith community than we'd like to on even employment non-discrimination in the gay rights realm. So we're certainly not all the way there, but the air is sort of, in the air is a spirit of progress, I'd say. You know, for the Employment Non-Discrimination Act, we had some pretty serious evangelical Christians, including megachurch pastor Joel Hunter from Northland, Florida, who came out with a strong statement of support for marriage equality. Professor David Gushee, who is a real trendsetter in the centrist evangelical movement too. He's at Mercer. He came out with a statement that not only embraced the Employment Non-Discrimination Act, but explicitly recognized the importance of including transgender Americans. And I think a lot of people have been on a journey with that one, but these are signposts along the way of, you know, on America's journey forward. And I know, you know, what we believe is once you put someone on the path of gay rights in any way, that they tend to keep moving. It's like a little bit of an inevitable journey that happens over time. So we're feeling positive, but absolutely feeling still the resistance and wishing that it were a little faster. After all, it doesn't look that likely that we're going to be able to pass the Employment Non-Discrimination Act still, even though we passed it through the Senate. And that's a bill that's been around for decades, and that feels really like low-hanging fruit.
Yeah, you're talking to somebody who's in the most schizophrenic state in the United States, with our senators Tom Harkin and Chuck Grassley. So we have you know, on the political right evangelical, and we have progressive left Tom Harkin, so we know the difficulty in a lot of these debates dealing with Iowa. Mark?
Barbara, I understand that you had spent a number of years working with members of the House of Representatives. What are some of the things you found insightful in that particular experience?
You know, I was there in the late 90s, and I went to Capitol Hill right out of college and found myself in the middle of everything from the impeachment debates to, you know, the end of the Clinton presidency and the beginning of the Bush presidency. And I think that one of the most important lessons that I learned is really the importance of bipartisanship and looking for partners across the aisle. That, you know, no piece of legislation, no initiative, no effort is going to succeed unless you are able to find common ground. And that's a lesson that I've been, you know, found very important to apply here to the work we do at the Religious Action Center as well. You know, we take very seriously our nonpartisan status and our very good relationship with members of Congress on both sides of the aisle, and really look for partners to work with on issues. You know, for example, some of the members of Congress that we work with on the issue of human trafficking are some of the most conservative members of Congress who we often don't see eye to eye to on issues such as reproductive rights. But we share a common passion for stemming the scourge of human trafficking. And so making sure that those relationships are strong and cultivated and long-term is one of the most important lessons I learned from my time on the Hill.
Let's talk a little bit briefly about the upcoming URJ Biennial and kind of what is on the slate as far as resolutions, and also what the Religious Action Center is working on right now. Can you talk a little bit about those things?
Sure. So I am the official staffer of the Resolutions Committee. right now. So I will start and invite my colleague Barb to join me. So we have 4 resolutions that are proposed this year, and they can all be found on the URJ Biennial website. And we've invited comments on them, and we are earnestly looking for folks to feel that they are bought into the process and that they should have a voice in the process. That is how it is designed, and that is how it works. So there is a session at Biennial which will be devoted to discussing this, discussing what the proposed resolutions are. There is a large plenary at Biennial which is about debate, and then where we vote on every one of these 4 resolutions. So that's just a little bit on the process. So on the substance of these 4, I'll take 2 and I'll give Barb 2. So one of the resolutions is actually on the Cuban embargo in Cuba, and we propose support advocating for lifting the Cuban embargo on humanitarian grounds, and also advocating for the freeing of Alan Gross, Jew who went over to help the Jewish community and who has been sort of unfairly treated and imprisoned throughout his own and his family's illness. And it's been a long time, and we are advocating for his release. So lifting the Cuban embargo and freeing Alan Gross is in one resolution combined. Another resolution is about supporting paid sick leave. So our movement was a strong advocate of the Family and Medical Leave Act, FMLA, which passed. And sort of in that same tradition, we are advocating for Congress to pass laws that would require an employer to pay for sick days and sick leave when a person is either taking care of themselves or taking care of their family. And that same resolution calls on our congregations all across North America to build coalitions and to engage in campaigns to promote paid sick leave. And finally, asks our reform movement and our congregations to look inside at our own policies and our own contracts and make sure that we are also living up to our ideal of covering sick leave for employees. Barb?
So there are actually 2 other resolutions that are coming up to the biennial, and I'll just sort of take a quick step back and just explain. The resolutions are proposed either by congregations. We have 900 congregations throughout North America, or various entities within the Reform movement, one of them being what's known as the Commission on Social Action of Reform Judaism. I happen to be the director of the commission, and it is really a body where all the different arms of the movement, from NIFTY, which is our youth movement, to the educators, to temple administrators, et cetera, really come together to prioritize issues of social justice. And so 2 of the resolutions, the paid sick leave resolution that Rachel just mentioned, as well as one on hydrofracking, have come from the Commission on Social Action. And the one on hydrofracking really prioritizes and urges further study of hydrofracking in terms of its impact on the land, the air, water, communities in general, where hydrofracking is taking place, and supports efforts and legislation and moratorium where states are moving in that direction to make sure that this new form of extraction of an energy source isn't having a significant detrimental impact on humanity and the environment in which it's happening. The 4th resolution that's coming is actually one that has to do with the First Nations of Canada. And you'll note a minute ago when I talked about the 900 congregations in the Union for Reform Judaism, I said North America rather than the United States, and that's because we have congregations north of the border, and we are thrilled that for the first time in a very long time, they've submitted a resolution to the URJ Biennial on the plight of the First Nations of Canada, who, not so dissimilar to the Native American community here in the States, have astronomical levels of unemployment, poor health and projected lifespan, educational challenges, and much, much more. And so the resolution really shines a spotlight on those challenges and calls for greater government cooperation with the First Nations community to address those problems, and really greater education throughout Canada to educate people on these challenges that are really so endemic to that community. So those are 4 of the resolutions that are being voted on. Biennial really is much, much bigger. It is a 5-day extravaganza. We have about 5,000 Reformed Jews who will be in San Diego December 8th through the 15th. And December 11th through the 15th. And it really is an extraordinary gathering with music and great speakers. We're going to have an address by Prime Minister Netanyahu. For any of your viewers who have been following the Women of the Wall, Anat Hoffman, who's the director of the Women of the Wall, is going to be joining us. We're also going to be celebrating the centennial anniversary of the Women of Reform Judaism and kicking off a celebration of Nifty at 75. So it is really just a spectacular 5 days together.
Yeah, and I'll add to that and put in a plug for a couple of the RAC's workshops that we're running there. So we're doing a workshop on immigration reform and the role that the reform movement and the Jews have been playing, and sort of the state of play on that issue, which is still very alive. We're also running another workshop on employment non-discrimination and LGBT rights, and we're going to have a rabbi come in and do some singing with us, and another couple of rabbis who were intimately involved, one who's got a relationship with Senator Hatch and helped us move him to vote for the bill in committee, which set a trend for 9 other Republicans to join, him eventually. So that's going to be another session. And then we're going to have a wonderful session on, I think we called it Skills and Thrills or something, and it's about training our movement to be social justice advocates and voices for social justice. We're really excited about that one. It's going to be a meaty 3 hours, and we're going to actually have a little contest in it and make it exciting. So we will be there. We also are thrilled that we're going to be doing some things on gun violence prevention at Biennial, because folks may know that December 14th, actually, during Biennial, is the anniversary of the tragic Sandy Hook shootings. And the reform movement got very involved in that issue. Even 1 week after that horrible tragedy, we actually organized a large set of religious leaders to come together in front of the National Cathedral. It was very broad, very diverse, and we all stood. It was freezing cold, and it was very sad. It was very pensive, and many leaders wanted to speak briefly, and then we actually tolled the bells to honor the lives that were lost. And from that point on, our movement engaged through our rabbis, meeting in district with members of Congress, and our congregants placing huge numbers of calls to Congress through something that we coordinated at the RAC and we sort of created, which was named Faith's Calling. And Faith's Calling actually exists as an independent website. It's a project of the RAC, but it belongs to many different faiths who all joined together. And one of our call-in days shortly after Sandy Hook, the Southern Baptist Convention joined us. The U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops joined us. Huge numbers of the mainline Christian denominations joined us. The Orthodox Jews and conservative Jews joined us. And the list goes on. And it's a way for the faith community to come together as moral activists and to strengthen and amplify our voice in favor of, in this case, gun violence prevention policy passing. So Faith's Calling is something that we've done now in conjunction with the interfaith community that we've organized on immigration reform, on employment non-discrimination, and we're actually going to be doing and plugging the Faith's Calling that we're running, which again is very interfaith, on the last day that Congress meets before the 1-year anniversary, so on Friday, December 13th. So stay tuned for that around Biennial, and just hopefully around your networks, you will be hearing of it. But we are about to debut that day. We've already got some wonderful partners who will be working with us on that.
And the Religious Action Center has a regular email list and text messaging service to get people to contact their congresspeople. Can you say a little bit about that?
Sure. If you check out our website, which is www.rac, which is RAC.org, it's got a wealth of information about the issues that we're working on, the way in which we ground our work in Jewish texts and tradition, etc., and plenty of opportunities for you to sign up for our networks and hear about not just the work we're doing, but where you can make your voice heard. You know, no member of Congress members of Congress are only interested in what we have to say insofar as that we here at the RAC represent a movement that is over 1 million strong and is active and engaged in these issues at the community level. And so making sure that people have the tools to lift their voices up and reach out to their senators and representatives is really the crux of what we do. And there's a way for you on our website. If you just give us your email address, we'll make it as easy for you as it can be.
Coalition building is obviously very, very important. My question is, how do you reach out to some groups that we don't normally have relations with? Who reaches out, and to whom do you reach out?
Well, that is something that's at the core of what we do at the RAC, and I think that it actually ties back to our initial discussion about church-state separation. You know, it turns out the Baptists were some of the creators of that part of the Constitution. But at the same time, we all do believe, even for the vitality of religion, and the Baptists were there in this too, in, not just church-state, we believe in church-state separation and freedom of religion. And so we have put together Rabbi David Saperstein, our fearless leader of almost 4 decades, has led many coalitions, including the RFRA coalition, the Religious Freedom Restoration Act, which really was an example of bringing together, every part from left to all the way right of the religious community who agreed on this policy and sort of reinforcing what they saw as a core American and religious value. Rabbi Saperstein has cultivated many relationships this way that we can take advantage of from the RAC. I've also found I do a lot of this outreach also on behalf of the RAC, and I found that coming to people of faith as a person of faith, so like even if you're coming as a person on the left, is more powerful than coming to a person of faith from a sort of secular group. So I almost think of it as, and this may seem like a crazy analogy, but some of my friends who've married sort of interfaith are best suited to be with the person who has come from a background of the same amount of faith as they've come from, even if it's a different faith. Now that's a whole issue of, don't need to get into the issue of interfaith marriage or the pew poll or anything else. I really don't. But I'm just saying that we come from a position of strength when we come as a faith voice to another person of faith. An example, when the gun violence prevention issue came back to the national fore after the Sandy Hook tragedy, and we were starting to try to galvanize momentum behind passing gun violence prevention policy, I wanted to sort of broaden our faith community outreach. So, in addition to, reaching out to some of the guys who I had worked with when I was at Third Way, like the Joel Hunters and the Reverend Sam Rodriguez, who's a Latino evangelical leader in California, I, through some friends at a group called Faith and Public Life, sort of ended up reaching out to Bishop T.D. Jakes in Texas, at the Potter's House at another enormous evangelical church in Texas, his chief of staff, and really just making a plea about what we were working on, a plea about what our role and responsibility and our reach as faith leaders, and what we could do and what we could bring to this debate, and it spoke to him. And so lo and behold, he was giving us quotes for our press release and joining us, tweeting about it. And I think we saw that his tweet had the most retweets of anyone's retweets when we were doing our first Fates Calling. So sometimes it's tapping relationships that we've cultivated through the RIFRA coalition and other coalition, and sometimes it's sincerely reaching out from our hearts in a way that we're able to do as people of faith, and sort of speaking in a moral language, and hoping that that one of our faith friends, even from a very different place, will connect with us, and that works too.
Yeah, I have had some very interesting conversations over the years with Congressman Steve King from Iowa. I had a conversation with him actually about immigration reform and amnesty a couple of months ago, if you're willing to dialogue, and you're willing to dialogue from where your point of view is, you can actually dialogue about these things. And that's really the only way, as far as I can see, to make real change, is to approach people who don't agree with you and have a dialogue and see if you can find common ground. So and when we're dealing with the Catholic Church on issues, that we try to do that, and when we're dealing with evangelical Christians on other issues, we try to do that as well. Let's talk about some issues where it's harder to find interest, much less support. Mark and I are both involved with anti-genocide advocacy and dealing with the Sudanese community. And it's difficult to even get Africa on people's radar, much less talk about what the United States should do and policy issues and things like that. How do you address, and how does the RAC address issues like that aren't front and center and before everybody on a regular basis?
Yeah, it is always a challenge. On the genocide issue specifically in Sudan, the Jewish community was really out in front on that issue from the very beginning. And, it's not difficult to understand why that issue resonated particularly strongly for our community. Rabbi Saperstein actually went, trying to think, probably about 5 or 6 years ago now, with Rabbi Rick Jacobs, who is the new-ish president of the Union for Reform Judaism, to a Darfurian refugee camp in Chad, and met with survivors of the genocide there and heard their experiences, and has brought back those stories and shared them widely with our movement. And they're incredibly powerful. And things are in some respects better in terms of what's going on with the status of Sudan and South Sudan. But obviously there's a long way to go. And we continue to talk to officials at the State Department and other folks in the NGO community, like Enough, which is really one of the leading NGOs working on these issues, about how we can keep up the pressure to make sure that this region that's still kind of teetering on the brink at best doesn't fall back into full-blown genocide. And we also continue to look for new areas for us to engage on these issues. One of the really big challenges right now is the humanitarian crisis in the Congo. And we actually adopted a resolution at the last biennial that spoke about conflict minerals. And in every cell phone that we carry in our pockets or our purses, there are minerals that make the phone work, and many of them are mined under slave conditions in the Congo and other countries in the area. And so what we can do, we consider what can we do as a Reformed Jewish community to highlight that issue and to keep up the pressure. There was in the big financial reform bill that passed a couple of years ago, known as Dodd-Frank, that was really a response to the economic meltdown. There was actually a provision that had to do with these conflict minerals, and for companies to be able to track where the minerals they're coming from, where the minerals that are going into the phones came from. And so we were very proud to do advocacy around that and really lift our voices as a movement around that. But it is a challenge, and one that we definitely struggle with.
One of the big issues one of the big issues for our audience of the show is Middle East, and dealing with the peace process and Iran and threats to Israel's security. So right now, the big issue, I think, for most of my viewers is probably Iran. Does the Religious Action Center have a position on Iran's nuclear program, or is it kind of staying away from that issue?
No, we have, and I want to be clear, when you say, does the Religious Action Center have a position, the work that we do, the advocacy that we engage in, is directed by the positions that have been adopted by the Union for Reform Judaism, which is the congregational arm of the Reform movement, and the Central Conference of American Rabbis, which is the rabbinic arm of the movement. So, I always joke, we're not sitting here twirling our metaphorical mustaches, figuring out what are we going to work on today. We're really looking to these resolutions that have been adopted at the various conventions to say, okay, how do we put those into action? And we have been very clear in multiple resolutions that Iran's nuclear program, with the potential for military use against Israel and other countries, is just a threat to, again, not only Israel's security, but international security. And we've been very strongly supportive of sanctions legislation that has gone through the House and the Senate, multiple bills over the past few years. And so, we continue to think that this issue is of core importance both to Israel and the United States. And it's very, gratifying that Secretary Kerry has been so deeply enmeshed in this in the last few weeks in particular, because, this really is, among the top issues on the foreign policy agenda of both countries.
We have a few minutes left here. I'd like to give you the opportunity to kind of talk about what the RAC is working on now and how people can support the RAC and what they can do to support the RAC's efforts.
Okay, I'll start. There are many ways to support the RAC. There's definitely a need to give financial support to the RAC, and Daphne Price is our Director of Development and actually worked as David's right-hand woman for many, many years first, and she does a phenomenal job, but, we really rely on the support, very generous support that we get from everyone. We have conversations all the time, like, are we going to be able to continue to afford this sort of very expensive technology called mobile commons, for example, that we're using right now for Faith's Calling? So what makes it special? Well, you can text 799-799 Faith's Calling, and on the day of Faith's, 877-877, and on the day that we're doing Faith's Calling, you actually get sent a text message with the phone number. You could just, if you have a cell phone, you just push that link and you call the number, and you are read by us the 4 talking points that we want you to be able to sort of hold on to in some way and say in your own words or in these words to your member of Congress. So that's very modern, very special technology, very expensive. So we decided to use it because we felt like it would really empower our advocates to be able to take action in a way that was easier and that it was just sort of quicker and everything else. But it's, a lot of money every month. And so one question we have is, can we continue to use that technology, or do we sort of have to sort of go back to a little bit more old-fashioned technology? So financial support, that's a very long-winded way of saying financial support is vital. But then there is just becoming a member of our lists and becoming an active congregant, engaging with your social action committee in your congregation, where we have sort of a direct line also, and giving yourself to doing both direct service and also advocacy projects, and understanding the link between direct service and advocacy. So you can run a food bank, but wouldn't it be nice if you also could, and we can make it easy for you, but wouldn't it be nice if you also could lend your voice to hunger issues and poverty and the budget and food stamps and, the farm bill, and we'll make it easy, but could you add your name to the list? And we'll show you what to do and what action alert to send in. So becoming sort of engaged with your synagogue, becoming engaged with the RAC through the, signing up like Barb talked about earlier, and supporting us are all really wonderful ways that you can be sort of a part of the social justice aspect of our movement.
There are also a wealth of resources on the RAC's website. If you're involved in your congregation and you are interested in doing a creative, engaging program on an issue like homelessness, or you want to, create a community garden on your synagogue's property, we've got a whole social action program bank of some of the most successful social justice programs that our congregations have run for the past few years. So, and those are there really to be emulated and used. So if any of your viewers are really looking for ways to strengthen the congregation's social action programming, the RAC website is the place for you to go and use those resources. And if you're looking for something you don't see there, all our contact information is there as well, and let us know.
Well, wonderful. Thank you both for joining us today on Understanding the World. And if you put in a word of thanks to Rabbi David Saperstein, my good friend and actually cousin by marriage, I would appreciate it. I look forward to seeing you at the URJ Biennial. I hope to see both of you there. And we hope that the Religious Action Center will be able to afford to do this work for a lot longer and to keep doing what it's doing and make a difference in the lives of American Jews and also the progressive community as a whole. Thank you for all that you do, and I hope everyone has a wonderful week. This has been Understanding the World with Rabbi David Kaufman.
Consumer Credit of America was your personal webmaster, Tom would filter out all bad debt emails. If Tom was your mailman, you'd never get any debt reduction junk mail. If Tom Coates was a lineman, he'd block any phone calls offering to reduce your credit card debt.
Hi, I'm Tom Coates with Consumer Credit of America, and we're still your best choice for credit counseling. We're local, we're accountable, and we can do more. You make the call when the time's right for you.
When it comes to competition, there really is none for Consumer Credit of America.